I do know I always go back to goals as kind of like wayfinders or stepping stones along the path, meaning that it helps us to take the first step. But then essentially, as soon as that step is taken, then we've got to release the goal from that point. And it might be a totally different goal that shows up from that next step. And I think where it gets tricky is what you're saying, Mary Alice, is being able to discern
Mm,
between when do I need to dig in and fight because I'm doing something that's, I'm battling against inertia,
mhm.
and when am I fighting against the flow of what actually wants to happen. So,
And I'll share one thing that I've been, as I'm contemplating this, that I think is really important is I've been working hard, which I'm sure everybody here is to kind of get out of my head a lot and really tap into my intuition
mhm,
and being much more receptive and open to seeing synchronicities.
mhm,
So I think also sometimes when I have to believe that that spirit of the universe will serve up those little signs to remind me I'm on the right path.
yeah.
So that's kind of what I've been relying on.
Yeah, totally. And to add more confusion is I had a call yesterday with Chris, another one of the guys that I work with, and we got talking about how sometimes we can make signs mean things that we want them to mean. And so then it's like, well, again, it goes back to discernment. And I think what Max said is it really hits the nail on the head in the chat. She wrote, that's when deeply knowing ourselves helps to discern, right? If we don't know like so clearly what our baseline is, then when we are given these really subtle signals, because I do think we're given all the information that we need, but so often we don't know that it's there or we don't honor it because we don't feel the pull out of center because we don't know where center is exactly. I just want to kind of speak to something that I'm feeling big time right now, which is I can really feel this transition from one way of being or one state into another state. And I think a lot of it has to do with the energy of spring that I'm sure we are all feeling at this moment. And I'm entering into this phase of creation and of building and of playing. But along with that, I'm really feeling this transition from the higher bodies to the lower bodies. And the reason that I say that is I think by using the term lower bodies, we're almost doing a disservice because they're not lower in like they're bad or they're not as good. They're lower in that they are our humanity, right? They're the human part of us, they're the animal part of us. And to deny that half of our nature is to deny our human experience and our divinity. And so I've really been thinking about this over reliance, honestly, that I developed on the higher bodies. Because for so long, I was so disconnected from the higher bodies. I didn't even know they existed. And then when I found them and they made me feel so much better, it was like, okay, I'm going to dump all my time, energy, and effort into understanding these higher bodies. And just for those that are newer to the gene keys, the higher bodies, the very highest is what's called the monadic. And it's a little bit of a cheat because it really encompasses all the bodies, right? It's like everything coming together, merging as one is that monadic body. So kind of set that one aside. The atmic body is the body of the divine mind. It is God's body that we also carry within us as we are a slice. And so that body, what it gives us is a connection to truth. It allows us to see the actual truth, things as they actually are. In other words, we begin to see with eyes of love and eyes of grace. And it heals the wound of separation. Because when I see the truth, which ultimately is that we are all one and we are all connected and we are all supported, I can't be separate from that. And then we move down to the next body, which is the Buddhic body, which is kind of like this ecstatic plane, this plane of love, like higher love. And it really drives that unity and that connection home. So the truth kind of is more like silence. It gives us clarity. And then we get into this Buddhic body and it really opens up our heart. And that's great. But unless we can translate that higher body into its lower counterpart, right, which is the astral body, its lower nature, what good does that do me? What that does is it allows me to have this deep connection with something when I'm sitting on my meditation cushion all by myself. But that's not how we move through the world. We move through the world in relationship. So to put all this energy into the Buddhic body is a requirement. And I think that I needed to do that. And I think all of us need to do that. However, I think what I'm sensing in myself, and therefore my guess is for a lot of other people on this call, is we're not taking those higher energies and grounding them down where they need to be able to move through the world to allow that stuff to come out and affect other people. So the next body down after the Buddhic is the causal body. That's the last of our higher bodies, and it's like our soul, and it ties to our physical body in the lower bodies. And I'm bringing this one up because right now we just entered the 25th gene key, which is universal love. And its shadow is constriction. And when he talks about constriction, when I say he, Richard, there is a very much a physical component of constriction. Like it is tension that comes into our body and we're not able to breathe fully and deeply. And our shoulders stay locked up like this and our belly gets hard and we lose flexibility and mobility and our spine's not upright. And I think in order for that constriction to release, we've got to find a way to take this higher energy and to pull it down. And the bridge between the higher bodies and the lower bodies is your heart. So the heart is the key to grounding these energies down. Because what it does is it serves as a filter. From the lower bodies to the higher bodies, what it does is it filters out all the lower frequency, lower vibration energy so that I can speak, see, feel only truth, which ultimately is only love. On the way down, its job is to kind of step the frequency down. So these higher frequencies can be really, really overwhelming for our body. And so the heart basically serves as a way of how can I translate this energy into something that moves my physiology, essentially, right? Because it's our physiology, meaning our hormones, that affect what we're speaking out into the world. I'm curious, is anybody else feeling this right now? Is anybody else feeling this split between higher and lower bodies at the moment?
Yes, totally. When I'm out there in the ocean training clients, it's like be embodied
Yeah. Yeah.
and find the heart connection, the above to the crystalline grid of the earth. And
Yeah.
it comes down, and then you can balance your chakras, which are just the evidence of what's going on in your space, shows up in the chakras.
Totally.
And then
Yeah.
yeah, aligning them. So the gentleman I spoke of, even after 20 years, is so stiff because he is constricted.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't get past that because he won't go to the emotional place.
Right.
So yeah, totally.
Yeah. And to tie it into the chakras, right? Like the root is all about safety, being supported, essentially having a connection to God. And then we get up into the sacral, and it's about our emotional body, and it's about our sexuality, and it's about our connection to other people and our creativity. And if we stay up in the higher centers, we miss out. That animal that's in us, that thing is full of energy and
Mm.
juice. We just got to learn how to be able to transmute that energy to push it into service, which is what I'm about to talk about as we dig in on the pearl sequence work here. So that was more for me. I was just curious. Yeah, Mac, good.
I'm not quite sure if I'll be able to explain this very well verbally because I'm feeling it in my body and not just my mind, but things are kind of beginning to integrate. I feel as if I'm in that process of those at different levels of those higher bodies coming into my body.
Mhm.
And it's not something I can verbalize very well at the moment. It's just I can feel it in my body. I actually feel it in my cells.
Same. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's the pearl ultimately signifies a return to simplicity, a return to the mundane life. I think it might be a little bit of a letdown as I do the talk that I'm about to give here, because people think that it ends in fireworks and it ends in like this state of being that you're like floating around, and it's not that at all. It's a return to the simple. It's a return to a love of doing the dishes again. You know, like that's what I'm talking about here. And what I was saying before, I'm not saying we let go of the higher bodies entirely. That is equally as egregious of an error. To pretend that they don't exist or to see them and then let go of them, like it's equally as egregious as pretending that we are all higher bodies and don't have any lower body. And so what we've got to do is figure out a way, how can I use the higher bodies, the connection that I have to them, to now address the lower body, right? To pull it down and to convince the lower energy centers that, hey, you also are divine. You're not just this animal that you have that you thought you were. So I want to say a quick prayer here as we get going on the pearl stuff. And then also this in my mind. So this is a prayer of transition. It's a prayer of honoring the higher bodies. This is my way of saying thank you to them and honoring them and allowing this transition to be more human and to ground these energies down into our being. So that's the intention behind the words that I'm about to speak. So if you can just get to a place where you are in a comfortable position, ideally with a neutral spine, soften the gaze, you can close the eyes, and just take a couple of big breaths. And just beginning to feel into those higher energy centers, noticing the quality, the spaciousness that they have, the connection to the firmament and the stars. And then beginning to notice the lower bodies and their grounding nature, their earthliness. Just opening up all of your cells, your belly and your heart to these words. Shatter my heart, O rapturous God. Crush me in the infinite softness of your embrace. Lead me gently to the sacred shore and drop me into your glittering depths. Let the sword of my longing pierce the rough hide of the great illusion, and may the blood of my life pour out into the sea of eternal creation. By your holy grace, may the red Buddha sweep me clean, leaving me stainless, pristine as diamond, empty and silent as the spotless sky. O most serene lady of limitless bliss, I court divine annihilation in your arms. Pulverize my soul into luminescent dust and scatter my dreams among the stars. I bow to your thrust, to the divine rapture that swells and wells in my breast as you carve and shape my yearning soul in the immortal fires of the fervor of God. So letting that rapturous energy in, feeling that sacred connection of the higher bodies, honoring them, letting them know that they are a vital part of who we are and what we do, and asking that they help to ground us down through our heart into our lower bodies. Just closing with a couple of deep breaths. Letting go of anything that needs to be let go and coming into the present moment. When you're ready, wiggling fingers, toes, moving the body, and coming back and opening the eyes. So that was a prayer from Richard, by the way. I did not write that. And that is Richard's, I believe it's the prayer of divine rapture. I think, I'm not positive. It comes from Seven Sacred Seals. So if any of you have access to that, that's where that's from. I'm simultaneously doing Seven Sacred Seals and the Star Pearl work myself. So thank you for allowing me to share that. Again, that was more for me than for you guys, but I hope there was some value to it for everyone. So while we're tuned in, I'd love for you to share in the chat right now, what is the feeling that's on top for you? So what is the most prominent feeling in your body right now after everything that we've talked about, after you've listened to that prayer? And as you're doing that, my purpose, the gene key of my purpose is the 60th gene key. So that 60th gene key, if you're unfamiliar, is limitation at the shadow, realism at the gift, and justice as the city. And justice is not at all how we think of justice. This is divine justice. And divine justice is essentially balance. Divine justice is the workings of karma. We as humans think of justice as retribution. We think that we need to do something to redress the balance. But it's not our job to judge. It's our job to love. It's our job to trust that the universe will redress the balance. My video is frozen, but can you guys hear me? Yeah, okay, cool. So that balance is an important part of the pearl work and helping to manifest the pearl. So the question that I have for you, and I'm going to give you a couple minutes, you can write on your computer, you can write on your phone, you can grab a journal. I want you to think, where are you out of balance in your life? So just take 2 minutes and write into, where are you out of balance? Is it relationship stuff, money, time, spirituality, physicality? Where are you out of balance? Take a couple minutes. Go ahead, Mac.
Thank you. For me, it's mainly my physical being. is out of balance because I spend most of my time lying on the couch like this, connecting to my spiritual self, doing the Star Pearl Venus sequence. And I've been reading the Sacred Seals as well, because I seem to be drawn there. So working on that as well, and feeling as if things are integrating in, feeling it in my body. And although this physical illness has affected me approximately half of my life, although I want it to change, I also realize that it's taught me a lot. And that's a purpose and reason. I might not have fully comprehended it yet, but I want to be able to do as much as I can to improve my physical health and particular energy. So that's where I'm at.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you, Mac. I was reading a Gene Key just yesterday. I've been really taking in a lot of, even for me, a lot of Gene Key stuff lately. And I can't remember which Gene Key it is, unfortunately, but what he said is it's the very desire to change that prevents people from changing. And so being able to let go of that desire to change and instead putting all that energy into, well, what can I do to make myself feel better? You know, not change anything, but just to make myself feel better in this moment. Thank you for sharing that, Mac. I appreciate it. Chris said money. Yes, money's a big one. And also the next word there is honestly. So none of this works if you are not completely and utterly honest with yourself. Money is a huge part of stability. In the modern world, if you don't have money, there's going to be this fear that is barking at you. Now, absolutely, you can learn and must learn how to deal with that fear. In fact, to get the money, that's what you've got to conquer, is the fear. But nonetheless, it's not going to change unless you own that you're feeling that way and then start to do something about it. So thank you, thank you, thank you for sharing that. Let's see. Relationships, integrating spiritual realization in daily life. That's kind of exactly what we were talking about, Kate, right? Grounding those energies down. I feel you there big time. So the next question that I have for you is, what is one small, keyword small, thing that you can do to help redress that balance? So I want you to take a minute or two, take a look at what you wrote down, at what feels the most out of balance in your life. And I want you to take another minute or two and write down a small thing. So for example, if finances are the issue, what I don't want is I'm going to launch a business. That's not a small thing, right? That is going to be very overwhelming and you're not going to feel like you're making much progress. So what I would do instead is I'm going to make a video. I'm going to write something, right? Or if it's um, if it's like something to do with your physical spaces, instead of I'm going to clean everything, it's I'm going to tidy up this pile of papers that's on my desk. So take a minute or two, write down a small thing that you are willing to commit to doing to help redress that balance. Go ahead, Dottie. You're muted still, my dear.
What the star pearl is bringing up for me is I have the Fortune of the Fathers. It's a
Me
brand.
too.
Oh my God. So, brand stability and
Culture.
culture. just to give you a little background, I left home as a teenager. My family is Mormon, not that that's a bad thing, but it didn't work for me. And I pretty much walked away from my family and made my own life on my own. So I kind of have this thing where they're over there, they're all from another planet, and there's this huge separation. And then I wonder why I have a lack of stability. So that fortune of the fathers is really inviting me to take what's really good, because there were some good things that I learned from my stepmother, from my father, and treasure those and turn them, for example, my stepmother was an incredible homemaker. She taught me about cleanliness and orderliness. That's a good thing to know, and I have that. So to, be grateful for that. She's my biggest teacher in life. She taught me the most about compassion and love and judgment and forgiveness. So my point is working on the stability by reconnecting my roots with my physical family. Not necessarily that I have to talk to them, but I can reframe them in my heart and in my whole being.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I would take that a step further to do something in the external world. So that might be just journaling that down, right? That's enough. I'm not saying you need to go and connect with them, but I do think doing something in the 3D world is vital to begin to bring this back into balance. Thank you, Dottie. Interesting comment from Haley. I've been feeling out of balance with my heart, too tuned into my intellect, not tapped into my emotional centers when connecting with myself and others. I sink into the observer automatically and it seems potentially imbalanced. That's exactly what I was talking about as well, Haley, with like being up in the higher energy centers. And it's almost like this, it's not spiritual bypassing, but it's on the border. It's on like the edge of spiritual bypassing. And so being able to pull that back down and to like really be present with somebody and with their emotions, I think is huge. And so for you, redressing that balance might be a commitment to staying more human in your interactions, for example. Yeah. Okay. And then I just want to speak to Hiss again. We do well at addressing and admitting the fear is there and are currently breaking down everything we want to achieve it to take the smallest task possible to try and get further each day. It just feels like everything is taking so long. So, two things there. One is that this is a patience game. To create stability in your life, specifically financial stability, requires patience. It's just a reality of the situation. It takes time for these things to come. So hang in there. What's key is as you are in that state, you've got to work on, like I said, the very thing that prevents the money and the abundance from coming in is the fear that it's not going to come. And that is much easier said than done because you are trying to overpower hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years of human evolution because we tie money to safety. That's not accurate, but that's the story that we tell ourselves. And so that is probably the most important work that I would point your way, Chris, is to really work on that fear relationship. I have a video specifically about this. If you scroll back a little bit, you can probably find it. And my guess is it'll be relatively helpful. Okay. Who's willing to actually do that thing? Or even better, who's going to do that thing? If you commit to doing that small thing that you wrote down, let me see a hand. I want to hold you accountable. This is going to be on the internet. Okay. Thank you. Do that thing. You told yourself you would. Here's the reality. If you don't do that thing, you are breaking trust with yourself. That is way worse than not doing whatever the thing is. So, all of this was for a reason. And that reason is that life essentially is a balancing act. We've got to be able to balance the higher nature and the lower nature. We've got to be able to balance all the different areas of our lives. And so often they are out of balance because we are deaf. So this is the 43rd shadow: deafness, insight, epiphany. And what I mean by deaf here, honestly, is overactive. You are doing so much in the external world that we can't listen to our own internal guidance system. And when we don't listen to our internal guidance system, things begin to come out of balance. And so the greatest way that we have to balance our lives is through service. It's by getting out of your own head and by getting into your heart. And when you're able to do that, balance will start to find itself. So the greatest way to balance our lives is through service, because one, it removes you from the equation. There's a book called 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, which take them or leave them, whatever. But one of the things that he talks about is people taking medication. Like the doctor gives medicine and says, go home and take this course of medicine. What do you think the adherence rate is for somebody to actually finish the course of medicine and take it as prescribed? Anybody got a guess? It's like 35%. Now, if you take your dog to the vet and the vet gives your dog medicine, what do you think the adherence rate is to finishing that course of medicine as prescribed is? It's over 80%. So we are more than twice as likely to move through the world in the way that will open our heart, in a way that contributes to the whole, in a way like we're in our own way when we're worried about ourselves. If you can take that energy and you can put it into service. Now, that doesn't mean you sacrifice yourself for that service. It just means my focus is on the service first and foremost. Then nature begins to bring things into balance and begins to act for us, because also by being in service, that's how we activate synchronicity. That's how we activate the forces of the universe helping for us. Okay, let's get into the to finish up this pearl here. So we finished up the brand last time. Man, there's a lot of people coming and going on this call. Forgive me for if I'm slightly distracted. There's a lot of beeping and dinging and back and forth here. So we finished up the brand, and now where we are is moving from the brand back actually to the sphere of vocation. So when you look here, yeah, it's hard to see, but this is the Pearl book. And up here, up top, this is our vocation, or excuse me, this is our life's work. This is our vocation. This is our culture. And this is our pearl. And so we started at our vocation. We came across, we went up to our brand. And what we're doing now is sealing this triangle off. We're going back to where we started. And that's exactly what service does. It seals this triangle and it creates a toroidal field of energy. So a torus, if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about there, picture a donut. That's the energy. So the energy comes up through the center and then wraps around and then feeds back into the same system. So it's a self-perpetuating system of energy. And it's fed by the divine. But the only way that that triangle can be sealed is by showing up to the world in service. And it's interesting, in order to seal that triangle, we end up back at the sphere of our core wound, which is also the sphere of our vocation. So you've got to remember, because that sphere holds double duty, meaning it's both the core and it's the vocation, it takes on a different flavor now that we're circling back around to it. So just like life's work, the very top sphere of your profile is life's work at the beginning. And then when we get to the pearl work, it becomes the brand. Well, your core wound turns into your vocation, and your vocation is where we get our internal power. It is the thing that drives that toroidal energy up and out of us. Then, by being in service, that brings that toroidal energy back down and calls it back into us. So what I'm saying here is you are never going to run out of energy. You're never going to run out of fuel when you are really and truly aligned to your purpose in the world. And what we realize is that deepest wound, that core wound that we hold, is no longer a wound at all. And the reason that energy is never ending is because it's supported by other dimensions. And the way that I want to kind of hammer this home for you is I want you, and none of these are my ideas, FYI. This is all coming from Richard. I'm just kind of reinforcing. I want you to think about the sun. The sun is out there in space, constantly of service. Doesn't care whether you're at the beach sunbathing or you are in the deepest of deepest caves in Bolivia. The sun is shining and offering itself to you. And because it is like that in service, it is constantly burning. And Richard speaks about the sun being fed from the darkness that's around the sun. In other words, it's the space. And what's in that space is consciousness. And this, I know right now, the science says is not the case, but we do not understand dark matter at all. We do not understand what's in it, what makes it up, how it responds in the world. Like, we are missing giant scientific pieces. So to pretend like we understand how things are working is so silly. So when you give of yourself unconditionally, you are refueled unconditionally. So often we don't show up in service because we're worried about how it's going to impact us, how it's going to impact our lives, or we're unsure that we're going to be able to handle what comes. But when it is from a place of true and pure, how can I be of greatest service to the whole? Your heart will always open wide enough to handle it. So getting back to the science a little bit here, there's a term called entropy, which is, I believe, the second law of thermodynamics. So the first law is energy cannot be created or destroyed. And then the second law is entropy, which is essentially that all energy moves from a state of order to a state of disorder. So the energy isn't destroyed, but it becomes less organized. What a dismal outlook on the world and the universe, right? Like, things just constantly move towards falling apart, move towards disorder. However, think about entropy through the lens of the law of correspondence. The law of correspondence being from Hermetic philosophy. And that law is basically as above, so below, or as within, so without. That's what the law of correspondence is. If entropy were true, if that were the whole picture, where is the gift represented in that? Never mind the city. But where's the gift? Like, that is shadow all the way. And I know that energies don't just have shadow. They have other components. So what makes much more sense to me is what Richard proposes is what's called syntropy. And syntropy is the idea that all of life is self-organizing. And you can see this, right? If you go out to a meadow that hasn't been touched by humanity, it's wild and there's weeds everywhere. Yes, but there's also flowers and birds and animals, and like it is a beautiful ecosystem. And then humans comes in and they need to make everything all neat and pretty. And then we're constantly having to do maintenance and it takes so much work and we affect this species that we didn't realize and this other thing. But nature is self-organizing. Another thing to kind of ponder or think about is the finite and the infinite. And I promise this is all coming to back to the pathway of service here. So I'm going to read, this is on page 115 of the Pearl book, or if you have the Pearl course, it'll be in there as well in the pathway of service. So this is something that Richard wrote in 2005. And this makes so much sense to me. Infinite systems exist in infinite dimensions. On account of this truth, the existence of closed systems can be seen as false. So a closed system basically is a system that we see as closed because it doesn't look like any energy can get into or leave that system. That's what our mental body tells us. That's what our logical brain shows us and tells us. So on account of this truth, existence of closed systems can be seen as false because infinite systems exist in infinite dimensions and we live in infinite dimensions. The perceived openness, so how open you are, how open you believe a particular system to be, of which you are a system, the perceived openness of any system is always equivalent to the frequency of consciousness pervading it. In other words, your frequency dictates how open you are to the infinite dimensions that are around us. And just like the sun that feeds off the darkness around it, that energy is coming from different dimensions. And so you also have access to these other dimensions, but you've got to raise your consciousness to the level that you are able to see it and you are able to believe it. It is therefore the degree of openness of a given system to its own multidimensional nature that directly determines the flow of energy through that system. So in other words, we've got to raise our frequency to a point that allows divine energy to come into our lives as fuel. And the way that we do that is with service. Because why did I just talk about all that? You have got to trust the universe in order to really step into your purpose. Because the universe is going to throw out test after test after test after test to make sure that you're ready and to make sure that you mean it. Because if it doesn't do that, and it puts you out there and you haven't done the internal work that's required, there's a potential for you to do far more harm than good. For all of us, for myself included. And so we've got to make sure that we trust the universe, that it's going to support us. And by understanding these other ways of seeing, right? By believing in syntropy, by believing in infinite systems, it gives us some sort of knowledge or some sort of belief for our logical brain so that it can calm down so that we can fully step into service. Because science, as it is right now, tells us that it will not support us. The universe will not support us, that it's a dog-eat-dog world, that you got to go out there, you got to look out for yourself, you got to work hard, you got to kill yourself because this universe is an entropic universe and it's all moving to disorder and you're fighting against it. And if you don't get it together and struggle and fight and strive, then you're not going to be who and what you're meant to be. And that is just the opposite of what's true. If you believe that, your frequency is going to drop immediately. And that means this energy that comes through these infinite systems is not available to you. So science says it won't. Science is stuck in the shadow frequency, like it or not. And it's hilarious. They think they have the answer. And then they're like, but you just got to give us this one thing that we don't quite understand. And that one thing, oh, just the fucking Big Bang, just the creation of all matter that exists. Like if that's a gimme, then we've got the rest figured out. Well, guys, that's not a gimme. That's like the thing. And if you can't figure it out based on the models that you have, the models are probably wrong. But they refuse to believe that because so many years and decades and for so long has been the paradigm. And so it's about listening to the stories that serve you, not the stories that are in the zeitgeist or in the culture. Service to the whole is service to self. Because I am you and you are me. It's really important to understand that. Because remember, we can't just, if we are grumpy in our service, if we're like, oh, I got to do this because I got to get like, I'm supposed to be doing this for these people. And it's, if that's the energy, it's not going to work. It's all about the frequency that you bring into the doing. So the question, what Richard calls the Grail question, the question that you need to come back to over and over and over every second of every day is, how can I be of the greatest service to the whole? Yes, Susan, you took the words out of my mouth. How we can be the greatest service to the whole is to do our own inner work. Everybody wants to skip that step and just bring their service out into the world. But there's a requirement, which is you've got to do the inner work. Now, you do not, I see you, Matt, give me just one sec. You do not need to have finished the inner work to bring it out into the world. That's not what I'm saying. It doesn't ever finish. You're not going to be complete. You're not going to feel ready. But you need to have a commitment in your heart of hearts to bring about your Dharma. And you have to be willing to sacrifice your ego in service to the whole. And so in parallel to you showing up in the outer world of service, we've got to be doing this inner work. And oftentimes, back to patience, the universe is not going to allow you to start doing the outer work until you've hit a certain threshold in the inner work. Mac, what you got?
As I was saying, that because I've been ill and I am doing the inner work as much as I possibly can, with ease, I must admit, and allowing the patience for it to evolve as and when, but with lots of contemplation, that what I'm doing and I feel I'm being of service and can do is sharing that process when it's appropriate. And I do that in several groups. And that is my contribution to the whole.
Yes.
Because that's what I can do now.
That's it. Thank you, Mac. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's what can I do now? These are all stepping stones. We all want the end without having to go through the messy middle. You got to earn the insights. I was just looking at the chat. I think those questions are good to go. Mary Alice, I'm glad that was helpful for you. Managing your vibration. Yeah, that's what I just talked about. Managing your vibration absolutely is a giant act of service. It's probably like the act of service because if your vibration, where we are of the most service is when we just bump into people throughout our day and we interact with them. And if I'm being a dick because I'm in a bad mood because something happened in my life, I just lost a giant opportunity.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
I would love to just say something on that because one of the things that I'm finding is I've been stressing so much through the golden path about like what am I supposed to be doing, right? Like what's my career? And I need to, and then I keep thinking like, okay, like as much as I want to figure out something that I feel is more purposeful for me, just being, just being in that higher state and those interactions. And so it's been taking me a while to continue to remember that. So I just wanted to share that's something I've been going through.
Yeah, totally. It just speaks to, and it comes from a pure place, right? Like we just want to help. We want to be of service. We want to get it started. And so it's not a bad impulse. It's just we've got to redirect that energy and trust that when it's time to do the outside stuff, that it will become clear that it's time to do the outside stuff. Our service to the whole actually is part of our healing process. It is part of our healing journey. So again, in no way am I saying do not bring stuff out to the world. It's just you got to know where am I in my internal growth and development and path as I'm doing that. Any questions on the pathway of service before I step into the pearl? Go ahead, Mac.
It's not a question, but an observation that in other people, because I have done sessions with other people, and quite often when people come into our life, they mirror the issues that they have, we have had often in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that I think that's partly why we need to do the inner work so that we can be of service.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a component to this that it's karmic, meaning like the people that you are meant to serve are going to be pulled into your life through karma. And that's why when we get into this energy of like, I need to do more, I need to chase people, I need to be seen, I need like all of that energy, you're trying to bypass the forces of karma that are trying to pull people to you. And again, back to patience. Anything else on service? Okay, going to the sphere of the pearl, which is our conclusion to this pearl sequence work that we've been doing. So the pearl is different from all of the other spheres. It's a gift. It's a gift from the causal plane. So I already talked about the bodies, right? We talked about the physical, astral, mental, and then causal, buddhic, atmic, monadic are those bodies. And then they have corresponding planes. So the belief in the gene keys is that, as an example, it's easy to think about with the mental body. So the belief is that there is this plane of existence, this plane of being that we can't see, but that holds vibrational information that is around us all the time. And contained within that vibrational information are thoughts, are ideas. And an example of this, to kind of hammer it home, it's what a guy named Rupert Sheldrake calls morphogenetic fields. But like DNA, for example, was discovered by two people across the world from one another, basically simultaneously.
Yeah.
The theory of evolution was discovered by two people on opposite sides of the world simultaneously. the punk rock movement popped up in opposite parts of the world simultaneously. And so what is happening is that our mental body is at a certain frequency. And whatever frequency that mental body is at, it matches to these different thought forms that are floating around in this field. And whatever matches us, those are the thoughts that get sucked into our brain that we see as our thought. So that's to kind of set the stage of how the gene keys teach that this works. And what I'm telling you now is that the pearl exists in the causal plane of reality. So it's the part of us that ties to our soul. The causal body is the soul. It's the archetypal part of us. So this gift from the causal plane that is the pearl, it comes on board when you have a direct connection to your soul. And I'm going to tell you what that means here in just a second. What's important to understand about the causal plane at a really high level is that it is, speaking of paradox, it is the world of paradox. It is the world where both are always true. So when you approach paradox, you are approaching a sacred space. And the more you try and think your way through it, the more you're going to cut yourself off from that frequency. So when we come to paradox, let this go. The thought goes, and we drop down into our heart mind. The other thing that's a part of this causal plane is, again, it's the world of archetypes. And what I mean by that is we start to see ourselves in myth. Yeah. We start to see ourselves as the knight fighting the dragon. We start to see ourselves as Sleeping Beauty. And it gives us a separation between our ego life and our soul life. Because what is required is immense courage and bravery to connect to the causal plane, because it involves letting go of the fear of the lower kind of vibration or frequency. And the only way, or one of the only ways that I know to move through that fear is through the power of story and through the power of archetype, and looking to figures like Christ, for example. Figures that teach us what happens on the other side when we're willing to actually take the leap. Because as many stories as there are for science and their worldview, there are just as many stories from the masters across time that tell us that the universe is a very different way. The question is, what are you going to believe? What are you going to listen to? An indicator that you're in the causal body is that you can only see the quintessence of things. Quintessence is a word that I never knew before the gene keys, but it's basically the essence within the essence within the essence within the essence into infinity. So it's the very root core of things. And the causal plane allows us to see with that level of lucidity. And when I say lucidity, I don't mean intuition. I don't mean clarity. I don't mean understanding. Lucidity here is to be able to see only that which is true. To be able to see with eyes of love. There's something that I've been saying a lot lately, which is that when people are speaking, they're either offering love or they're asking for love. That's lucidity. You can see one of those two things in every interaction. Even when somebody is screaming at you at the top of their lungs, they're doing that because of their core wound. And what they need is love. Not for you to dig your heels in and to push back and to throw up your walls and to protect yourself. So this comes alive. This ability to have this level of lucidity comes alive when you are able to use your heart mind. So this is a skill. It's something that you need to practice. And what I say when I mean heart mind is, or what I mean when I say heart mind, is basically taking your mental body, your astral body, and your physical body and mushing them all together. That's your heart mind. And the way that you practice, it starts in meditation and being on the cushion and trying to connect to something greater than yourself. Because the only way that you can have that connection is when you are in your heart mind. We've dropped the thought. We've connected to the body. We're not identified with ourselves. We're not identified with anything really. It's just things come and things go. It's this place of openness. Then the next step in practicing this is when you are like, take it off the cushion, but not engaging with somebody else. So for example, can you maintain that same way of operating when you are doing the dishes, when you are walking around your neighborhood, when you are journaling, when you are doing some gardening, whatever, just some menial task that you are doing? Because now we're bringing in 5 sense external inputs. And so our tendency is to get drawn out of being able to blend all of them together and instead focus on just one thing, right? We get distracted and we like, maybe it's the dirt in our hands if we're gardening, or maybe it's like this really intense emotion as we think about this other situation that happened in our lives. So that's the next step. Then the step after that is to practice. Can you operate from the heart mind when you are engaging with another person? And my advice is to have it be a low stakes conversation with somebody that you really trust. So a family member, a close friend, about something that isn't really all that important. And what you're trying to do in those moments is to not listen to their words, which I know is kind of funny to say, but you're listening to their frequency. You're listening to their energy. You're listening to the space that's between the words. That is how you see with lucidity. If you attach to the words, you don't see what's underneath the words. So this is a skill of being able to see what is below what they're saying right now. And we start to attach ourselves to that, because remember, words are just pointers to energy. That's all it is. There, we feel this thing inside of us, and then we try and describe that thing that we're feeling to another person. And the only way that we have to do that is words. And that's why language can be so frustrating sometimes. That's why telepathy would be such a superior means of communication, because I can just give the energy to the other person, and then we don't have to worry about that translation process. So we've got to try to understand what's happening below the words. And the reason that I say low stakes and somebody that you trust is you can ask and you can say things like, are you saying this because of this? Right? Or is this emotion what you're feeling as you're saying that thing? And we can start to develop a skill set. And it's really, really helpful. Go ahead, Mac.
From my limited experience of working and practicing in modalities that I have done, what I've noticed is that when someone's speaking, I write down what they're speaking, but I'm also feeling the energy.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to write down, because I forget what they're writing down because I'm feeling into the energy, I can look back and say, this is what you've said, but I feel, and my questions then directly to them so they recognize the feeling that they're feeling.
I love
Does
that.
that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I love that practice. That's awesome. That's awesome. And there's another camp here. Sometimes I'm similar in how I approach it, Mac. And then there's another camp, which is to like fully let go of needing to remember anything and just trusting that like in that present moment, what needs to be said is what comes through. There's because the other half isn't the listening, it's the speaking. So I just talked about the listening part, but you also have to develop an ability to speak from your heart mind, not from your logical mind, which is for me one of the scariest things ever because you don't really know what you're saying. So you're like, you're constantly thinking, am I going to sound like an idiot? Am I saying the wrong thing to this person? Like, that's the thoughts oftentimes that starts to run through my mind as I'm working on this skill. But when I can fully let go and trust in what's coming through me, I'm telling you, those are the moments that people just like, those are the impact moments. Those are the moments where I see people drop from their head to their heart and they just get something that they haven't been able to get. Or it's the moment that like they start bawling their eyes out because I touched something in them that maybe they didn't even know was there. And I certainly didn't know it was there. I didn't even like I say things sometimes that I don't understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. And it's because of this heart mind trust that I'm developing. Certainly not all the way present, but it's there. So the pearl is the harvest that you get from all the other work that you've done along the golden path. So we start with the activation sequence. We develop in a trust in ourselves, a trust in God, a trust, um, a trust that it's all going to be okay. Some sense of stability. Then we do the work of opening our heart, of dealing with our trauma, of looking at our stories. Then we do the work of starting to take initiative and showing up in growth and service to the world. And then finally, after all that work, the pearl begins to come online. And it's the reason that there is no pathway to the pearl. So if you look at your profile, the pearl is just kind of floating in the middle with these other three spheres around it. Now you'll see three kind of half lines that run from each of the other spheres of the pearl. So there's like a partial line from your brand, a partial line from your vocation, and a partial line from your culture, but they're not actual lines. And that's because the pearl is that pathway is titled the pathway of the quantum. In other words, it's not linear. It just comes, it appears, it shows itself from all the hard work that you've done. And when it does, it brings immense laughter and the ability to finally take some deep breaths again. I did not realize how limited my breathing had gotten from somebody that had taught breath work for years. I taught breath work. And I didn't realize how much of my ribs and diaphragm just were not expanding. And you don't know until you get to the other side and you feel it. And you're like, oh, this should have opened 10 times more than what I was getting. And the reason I say laughter is that you get the joke. You get, you laugh at yourself and like how much tension and stress and pressure and seeking. And you laugh that it was that very thing that it has blinded you the entire time. You laugh because you see that when the pearl dawns, the gene keys self-destruct. Yeah, that's a whoa moment for some of you guys. I can see it in your faces. When that pearl comes, there's an old saying. This is actually in here somewhere. This is the Pearl book. I can't remember where, but there's an old saying, no magic, shun magic. And what that means is when it has fully dawned in you, when you really know this system and any truth-based wisdom system, you then shun the system. You push it away because it's a means to an end. That's all it is. I have plenty of videos out there that are hopefully helpful in making sure that you don't confuse the baby with the bathwater, that you don't think that the gene keys or human design or Christianity or Buddhism or whatever is where we're trying to go here. Understanding those things is not the goal. The goal is to live an open-hearted life. And so when the pearl comes, we laugh, we breathe, and we let go. We let go of tension. Remember, I was talking about that 25th gene key and its shadow of constriction? All of that starts to leave. So when you're looking at the gene key that you have in your pearl, it is a quantum leap, Lily. You are absolutely correct. When you look at that gene key, the shadow there will show up when you forget what's important in your life and you buy into the illusion. That's when that shadow is going to be front and center. When you forget that we're on this giant rock flying through space in the middle of a black universe, and you think that what matters is your fucking taxes. And what happens when you forget what's important is you become tight. And when you become tight, what happens is the exact opposite of the endless giving and service that I talked about with regard to the sun. And without that endless giving and service, well, we can't seal that toroidal energy. And so we're constantly leaking energy out through our old patterns, through our old behaviors. We're just constantly laying landmines in our lives and then stepping on them and then being like, what the fuck, God? But you laid the landmine and then you stepped on it. The gift of your pearl allows you to really and truly see. So it gives you that lucidity that I spoke about earlier. It gives you a sense of clarity. And clarity here is different from lucidity. Clarity, I believe, is the 57th city, maybe 58, something like that. And it comes after intuition. So clarity is an ability to essentially see and know God's will. Compare that with lucidity, which is an ability to see and know what's happening around us and inside of us. But both of those things come with the gift of our pearl. And with the city, like all the cities, what you find when you get into the city of any of the gene keys is that ultimately they turn into like one unified field, which is another part of the reason that I say the gene keys self-destruct. You start to see that they're all interconnected and your profile is just a way in. And it's not actually like these archetypes and these energies, we all contain them all. Now, we do have some more prominent than others, and there is a specific path to our awakening, and that's where the gene keys can help. But at a certain point, we begin to let go of that. At the point where we start to see that we aren't our ego, we can start to let go of the profile a little bit. However, you can't bypass this. So don't just think, oh, Jay said this, so I can just, like, I'm just going to, like, you got to trust your own intuition and your own guidance. Because the profile can be really helpful when we are still hanging on to our ego, like it or not. Or I should say, ego is the driver, right? We don't ever want to get rid of our ego. We just want to subjugate it to our higher self. But when the ego is still the driver, um, it's it needs, especially the mental body, needs something to attach itself to so that the energy can, like the real energy can pass through us. And in that way, the profile can be really, really helpful because it occupies our mental body while information from these other dimensions, this wisdom that Richard talks about and that I talk about, that is very different from knowledge, it's slipping its way into you as your mind is preoccupied with the words. Quickly, I'll touch on the 6 lines of the pearl, and then we'll do a quick question on pearl, and then we're out of here. So 6 lines of the pearl. First line is simplicity. This is really important for everyone to understand. And I talked about it. Remember, the first line is the base of all the other lines. And I talked about it before somewhere. Where was it? Whatever, doesn't matter. I can't find it. What I was talking about is I think a lot of people think that when they have this spiritual awakening, that it's like fireworks and rainbows. But in reality, what it is a return to simplicity. Now, awakening can be fireworks, and there can be a halo, and there can be all of these things that have been talked about. But I think that's the exception, not the rule. In a way that you can kind of know that this is true is look at every avatar, every like holy man or woman throughout time, and look at how they live their lives. Not every, but the vast majority. I just thought of Osho, who is certainly not that, but most of the masters live this life of like they meditate a bunch, they eat very simple food, they talk to their disciples, and that's that. And that's what first line pearl is all about. It's a return to simplicity. And because that's the base of all the other lines are about that too. Second line is about recognition. And this is not like you're seeking recognition, but as a second line, it can't help but come your way. And I know some of you are probably thinking, well, I don't want any recognition. And what you will find is that when your heart opens, that recognition will start to feel good. I promise. And so the second line isn't doing anything for recognition, but it does love to be on display. It does love a good show. The other part of recognition is the second line pearl is really good at recognizing others. So it's about taking what you've got and passing it along, passing the gift that you receive from your pearl to another person. Third line is celebration. And this is the celebration of life, the recognition that what we are humans are here to do is to celebrate. That life is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be a party. It's supposed to be joy. And the third line knows that. Remember, the pearl sequence is a lot to do with prosperity, which of course has a financial component to it. So the third line takes all that money that it makes and it throws a freaking ripper, right? Like it just throws all that cash into helping people have fun. The fourth line is charity. So the fourth line helps others that is in their direct sphere of influence. Helps your family, helps your friends, helps a segment of people that you identify with. It you know, where the third line's throwing a party, the fourth line's going to feed 100 homeless people. And that's what returns fourth lines to the feeling of simplicity. It's what really makes them feel alive in the world and whole. And then the fifth line is power. So of all the lines, fifth line pearl is the line that has the highest potential for the most amount of money to come into the world. However, that money is applied to impact, meaning it is applied to a practical solution. So where fourth lines are going to throw a dinner for 100 homeless people, fifth lines are going to start a charity that ends homelessness with all the money that they've gathered. Right? So it's about the use of power. Bringing service into power. Showing people that power does not need to corrupt. That the new model for power is a model of service. And then finally, the sixth line, which is yours truly, because I have 6 lines freaking everywhere, is nature. And basically, it's a return to the realization that there's nothing that we need to do. That the universe is taking care of everything for us. That we just got to get out of the way and trust. And there is a component also of like actually returning to nature. So spending more time in nature because we're returning to simplicity. Who's got questions on the pearl? Because that's all I got about it.
I'll just say something really quick because I thought it
Please.
was beautifully synchronistic. I'm a fifth line pearl, and I just read that in the other the other day in the star pearl, and it just so happens that and that to me was the true meaning of philanthropy. Philanthropy being love for humanity, and reading what that big 15-page essay that Richard wrote, I forget the name of it. It was in the toolbox thing, but he talks about that. And my project is called Heal Humanity, and it's specifically to end homelessness. That's been it's just been on my heart and for my last career as a first responder and working so close to it. And it was one of the things that shattered, like, my heart, broke my heart, and also was like shattered my heart open. So I do a lot of work in that area, and a dream has been percolating inside of me for like 4 years now. And anyway, things are like moving, and you know, I'm in all the places right now that I'm supposed to be to start, like, for example, catching the wave, like dropping me into, the culture and stuff to, I guess, draw the people around me, like, to help bring this, whatever it is. And I know this is like a perhaps multi-generational, like, undertaking, but you said it, so I'm like, that's me.
I love it, dude. Yeah. Thank you. And that's multi-generational thinking is the way. We got away from it as a culture and as a society. But if you go back even just a few hundred years and think about the cathedrals in Europe, those were multi-generational projects. And it's what's required. What a big part of what's killing our culture right now is quarterly earnings reports. Like, we're not going to get anywhere if we continue to have quarterly earnings reports that companies are making all of their decisions based upon, because it incentivizes short-term behavior at the sake of the whole. Okay. Thank you all for being here today. Chris had a question that just popped up. How do we use the sphere and the line to figure out how to work with that key, in this case, the pearl? So the best advice that I have, and this goes for any key, or excuse me, any sphere, you've got to tell a story. You've got to figure out a way to tell a story. So, like, one of the things that I love about the star pearl, I'm going to pull it up on my phone here because I had it up right in that moment. One of the things I love is they have these little graphics that help with this. So this graphic here, and what it does is it like tells you what to insert where, which I think is really helpful. So this one is on a pathway. And what it says is, through sharing gift of your brand, right? So in my case, through sharing preservation with the world, and at the same time being deeply grounded through gift of your stability, which in my case is insight, I open the path to the miracle of my, in this case, it's my pearl, which is emanation. So the little story or the sentence is, through sharing preservation with the world and at the same time being deeply grounded through insight, I open the path to the miracle of emanation. Right? So that's what I'm talking about. Take the word that you have in your gene key and the word that you have for the keynote for the line, and all your life experience is another part of what you're rolling in here, and create a story using those words. And nothing is right or wrong. In fact, the more sentences and the more stories you can create with it, the better. And in that way, it will really deepen your contemplation and take you a few different places. Monica, I'm working on Fortune of Our Fathers is where I wound up. You're welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here. Okay. Last thing I got, as always, is just letting you know next call is in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from today. That is April the 3rd, 12 to 2 Eastern Daylight Savings Time. We had a clock change here. Everybody was here at the right time. So I'm assuming you guys are all in the know on the clock change. If not, make sure that you know about it. We're going to be talking about, at least my rough plan right now, to talk next time about the pathway of the quantum, those 3 pathways that connect to the pearl, because like I said, that's a totally different vibe. And then the meat of it is going to be what's called the pathway of individuation, which is actually a pathway that runs straight up the center of the profile. So it goes purpose, sphere of attraction, SQ, pearl, brand, all the way on up. And it has a very specific kind of purpose and meaning to it. So I'm going to dig into that a bit next time. And then last thing
I'm sorry,
is just
what's that one called again?
that's called the pathway of individuation.
Individuation. I had heard that before. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then the last thing is I got an exciting kind of heads up, which is Courtney and I, who, if you pay attention to the channel, you know Courtney. She is my girlfriend, also a neuroscientist, who does a lot of work with in kind of nervous system regulation, somatic experiencing, that kind of thing. We actually have decided we shut down the container that we've had going that Susanna is in, for example. We closed it to just those people. And what we're doing is come the first week in June, we're going to begin a cohort. So if anybody is interested in doing some deep work, it is going to be a 6-phase journey, largely using the Venus sequence to help us get into the somatic work that needs to be done and reprocessing some of the trauma, and also just setting some of the basics. I'm going to have something coming out about this, but it is going to be a 5-month, everyone starts together, a kind of curriculum that we're all working on. Everyone ends together at the end. And it's going to be heart work, but with the goal of that's the prep work, kind of exactly what I was talking about today. We've got to be doing our inner work. It's got to be at the same level of us wanting to show up in service in the outer world. And so that's the lens through which I'm framing this, is we're doing the inner work so that we can show up in service. So keep your eyes peeled for that. You'll start to see more about it soon, and we'll take it from there. Thanks for being here, guys, as always. Much appreciation. See you next time.